Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with Chief French about community violence. It's part of an ongoing dialogue that the Chief has been having with the community, especially during the pandemic, since we can't get all out and connect with each other as we normally do, to talk about something that's really important in our community, which is our safety. And so the Chief really wanted to have this forum to be able to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going on from the PD side, and to also hear from you and have some questions answered. So I wanted to go a little bit over the format today so that you guys knew what the format is. Chief and some of the command staff are going to be presenting some information, and then after that we will take questions. For those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, there is a button that should be available on your phone where you can, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand. I will be looking at that as a way to be able to take questions when it's time for questions. The other way that we could do that is when I call time for questions, because if you pop it in now, I might not be able to go all the way back. You can pop them into the chat and we'll try to take questions that way as well. I'll bring you on board so that you can ask your question, and then after you're done answering your questions, I'll send you back to the attendee list so that you can listen for the answer. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. Everybody's thumbs up good. If you're not, just let me know. We have a little bit of time and I can go over that. My name is Michelle Milam. I'm Crime Prevention Manager with the Richmond Police Department and a longtime Richmond resident. And so at this point in time, I'm going to ask the panelists to please turn on your cameras. And your audio too. And I am going to turn it over to Chief French to kind of give an overview of what's been going on lately in our community and an update. And I just asked the panelists, if you're not speaking, make sure you put yourself on mute so we don't hear any background noise. Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa French. I am the police chief, and I thought it was important to have this community town hall to talk about the violence that's been occurring in our community. So as you may have heard or read in the paper, watched on TV, we've had numerous shootings since this summer. Violence really picked up since the beginning of summer. And so today we want to specifically talk about that violence and what we're doing to address it, and get your questions and hopefully be able to answer all your questions about how we're going to be moving forward. So Mandy, if you could start the, you could go. All right, next slide. You can go to the next slide. So just for background purposes, to go over the homicides, we've had 16 homicides this year, and we've had our first homicide in April of this year. We had actually gone 6 months without having a homicide. We went from October of last year, 2019, to April of this year before we had our first homicide. And it was a little bit quiet after that, and then this summer, things really picked up. So as you can see here, we've had, one of our homicides was an officer-involved shooting. That was the one that was involving Oakland PD. We've had 3 domestic or family-related homicides, so the people knew each other. One was a horrific murder-suicide. So 3 domestic or family-related homicides. 2 involved unhoused persons or homeless people. The most recent was last night. We had a unhoused person that was murdered in the Central District. 5 personal disputes or individual feuds. So this can be maybe a drug transaction gone bad or something similar to that, what we know of those cases thus far. 4 gang related, and I really want to be careful when we use the term gang. It's not that they necessarily are in a gang. We kind of use that informally, but I probably should have used different language, but more neighborhood related violence. So, you know, people from certain neighborhoods, for example, maybe from North Richmond or Central Richmond or Crescent Park. So those are classified in here as gang related. And then 1 where we don't know what the motive is. So that's a total of 16 homicides for this year. Just to put that in perspective, for all of last year, we had 17 homicides. one was an OIS. So 16 neighborhood kind of homicides for last year. So we're at the same place that we were last year. Next slide, please. Shootings, that's classified by the Penal Code 245A2. So there are 57 shootings in which there was a reported victim. So that doesn't mean the victim was actually hit, but there was a victim that said somebody shot at me or they were actually shot. Additional, so a total of 73 shootings, including the homicides that we've had so far. To also put that in perspective, all of last year we had 37 total victims that were shot, which was an all-time low for us last year, 2019. Next slide, please. So while I gave you the numbers for people, victims that we actually had, there were many more shootings than that, and 101, as you can see from this slide, from beginning of this year to today. 101 total shootings where there's property damage, somebody, shot into a vehicle that nobody was in, or a house got hit. So 101 total shootings there. And you can see how they're broken down by district. Next slide, please. And then the shot spotter activation. So while there was 101 shootings, the shot spotter actually picks up how many rounds were shot during those activations, and there was a total of 603. So that's a lot of rounds being fired across our city. So and you could clear the PowerPoint. So I wanted to kind of just give you a perspective of what's been going on. A lot of this has been since the beginning of summer, June 1st to current. This month of September has been our busiest month thus far. And there's a myriad of reasons, and we don't know exactly why we're experiencing this level of violence. COVID could be playing a part in it. Neighborhood disputes, as we discussed earlier, the homeless issues, domestic violence issues. There's just a lot of different reasons, and to be honest with you, we can't pinpoint any one reason why the violence is occurring. Now, we also know that there has been an increase in shootings amongst our, historically, what we've called our Latino gangs, the 13s and 14s, where they might not have resulted in homicides, but there have been a lot of shootings between people that have claimed these particular gangs. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Simmons, who is going to discuss what our strategies are in addressing this level of violence.
So good afternoon, everybody. Captain Timothy Simmons. I'm responsible for all of our criminal investigations and all of what we call our special investigations, which would include shootings and homicides and things of that nature. So like the chief said, we recently put together a strategy to try to address very specifically the gun violence that's going on in the city, and really with a goal of doing two things. Number one, to disrupt and interrupt the current cycle, and number two, to really engage as many stakeholders within the community as we possibly can. Fortunately, just this week alone, the RYSE Center has really taken a lead on our particular initiative of getting a variety of community stakeholders together to really address what's going on with our young people. Because when you look at the wave of violence that's going on, much of it is involving the young people in this community. So that's naturally going to be part of our strategy on how to disrupt this gun violence, is really reaching out to the young folks in this community and helping them with either A, making better decisions, or B, giving them safe places to go to talk with folks. And to take a kind of a quote from Camera Paul, we've been meeting for several times this week already. She said, young people are waiting for adults to show up. And I thought that was a pretty profound statement. And that's really what this effort is on behalf of the police department, is we want to do our part to show up. So we have put together a strategy to really try to intervene and disrupt the current cycle of gun violence. That strategy is centered around building strong community relationships and strong community engagement. So you're going to see Officers and detectives that are specifically assigned to this temporary operation are going to be getting out of cars and connecting with community stakeholders and attending community meetings, and you might even see them on Zoom meetings like this. The chief has temporarily reassigned a small cadre of patrol officers that have been selected based upon their skill set, based upon the relationships they have within the community, and they've been assigned to us within the Investigations Bureau to work collaboratively on this particular operation. I do want to emphasize it's a collective, meaning we have no desire in the police department to target specific neighborhoods or over police specific community groups. Rather, we want to be intelligence driven and really understand who are the individuals who are committing gun violence, and that's where our attention is going to be. We're going to focus on the individuals who are committing the violence and hopefully intercede and disrupt that cycle by use of several different means. Some of the resources that we're looking to tap into, of course, is our partnership with RYSE, our partnership with the Bay Area Peacekeepers, the West Contra Costa County School District. Even though right now we don't have a contract as a police department with West Contra Costa County School District, the chief has designated some officers to be youth resource officers, and Captain Walle will talk a little bit more, hopefully, about their role on patrol, but they're designated personnel to work with young people. We're working with Office of Neighborhood Safety, and we're working with PAL, the Yanima Healing Circles, led by DeWanda Joseph. So those are just some of the resources and community groups that we're looking to partner with in relationship to our operation. Again, to intercede and disrupt the cycle of violence that's going on right now. The overarching goal is to help folks understand that the police department is just one resource. We're one part of this process, but really it is going to take an all hands on deck sort of mentality to really be successful. We have to come together and as a community and come together as a group and everybody do their part. And so this is our part in saying that we're going to dedicate these resources to committing to disrupting this violence. So that's kind of our strategy without really getting into it. It's two-pronged. There's an enforcement prong to it, and then there's a community engagement prong to it. So you'll be seeing social media posts talking about what we're doing. You're going to be seeing possibly even some news articles as we engage the media themselves. So giving them some information about what we're doing because we want to keep it public. We want to keep it out there. We want to be transparent. And we want to get the folks off the street that are dangerous. And that is the other part of that. So on that note, I'll pass it over to Captain Walle, and he could talk a little bit about what the patrol officers are doing on a daily basis to help aid in this disruption of cycle of violence.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Captain Walle. I'm the manager over the Operations Bureau, which consists of the Traffic and Special Events Division and the Uniform Division, the Patrol Division. So as the chief had spoken earlier, gun violence is a complex issue because it involves gang membership, domestic violence, mental illness, drug-related disputes, and other issues. Currently, officers are conducting lethality assessments at domestic violence calls in order to identify those victims that may be prone to immediate danger by their abusers, and they try to provide them with resources to get them out of that cycle of violence. They currently refer individuals who are mentally ill and have propensity for violence to our mental health assessment team in order for them to provide intervention. Our officers are patrolling homeless encampments. Just like all other neighborhoods, they patrol the encampments in order to work with homeless service providers to mediate problems and arrest violent offenders. They conduct high visibility patrols in gang hotspots to deter gun violence. So in gang-related violence, officers focus on decreasing an offender's mobility to travel between different gang hotspots. So when officers receive intelligence from the Criminal Investigation Division, they act on that intelligence. They conduct car stops, pedestrian stops of known offenders in those gang hotspots to prevent gun violence. They target vehicles that are involved in predatory driving in gang neighborhoods. They also monitor main thoroughfares that lead into gang neighborhoods and out of gang neighborhoods in order to deter would-be shooters. They patrol known gang hotspots where people are congregating in order to deter shootings in those neighborhoods. They also increase their patrols in certain neighborhoods when we receive information about maybe the day of the week or the time of the place where the shooting may occur, or if we see a pattern of shootings occurring. They conduct searches for illegal weapons in high-risk places during high-risk times. And we've had overall department-wide increase on traffic enforcement by all uniformed personnel. And as Captain Simmons had said, we recognize that community relations can be strained when conducting these types of operations. So we don't want to have the public perceive that we're targeting specific neighborhoods. So unless the person is a known gang member, our officer is going to be targeting activity and not specific individuals. We're still leveraging our relationships that we built over the years with our community members to learn more about the neighborhood dynamics and learn to find out why the shootings are occurring, who the shooters are, in order to develop new investigative leads. Officers are continuing to work on their beat projects. Oftentimes, a lot of these quality of life issues are in the same neighborhoods where the shootings are occurring. And as Captain Simmons said, next year we're going to have youth service officers assigned to the different districts in order to work on prevention and intervention with our youth until, or if we have a school contract and they're back in the schools. That I'll turn it over back to Michelle.
So thank you for the presentation and thank you for the information that we have. Really appreciate that. Now is really a time for you all to ask questions. And so there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. First, I'm going to call on the folks who have put their question in the chat, and I will bring them on board. That way they can ask their question to any of the panelists to be able to respond. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we have. If you have a question and you want to drop it in the chat and you're like, I really don't want to, answer it on the, on the Zoom feature, that's totally okay. Just make sure you put that in parentheses and I can read that question for you if you feel more comfortable with us doing it like that. So I'm going to the chat, and the first question that I received was from Carol. Mandy, can you bring up Carol?
Hello?
Yes, Carol, you're on. Feel free to ask your question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what's being done to stop or to get illegal guns off the streets, and then once they're confiscated, what happens to them?
Thanks, Carol. And that question can go to any panelists.
I'll take the first stab at that question. So Carol, thank you for the question. That's actually a really important question. To start with, I'll let you know that we actually have a detective that's currently assigned to an alcohol, tobacco, and firearms task force with a primary function of identifying illegal firearms and how they're being trafficked into our city and being distributed amongst various citizens. And so that is actually her role and her job, amongst the role and job of some of our other special investigations detectives, to try to develop that intelligence about who might be utilizing illegal firearms. So they use that intelligence and that data to find those individuals that have those firearms, and they oftentimes work with patrol officers in order to actually physically take those guns off the street. And once those guns are confiscated, they're booked into our evidence room, and there they stay until a case is adjudicated through the court system. Those firearms are used as evidence in the court proceedings. Once that case has been adjudicated, then those firearms are actually destroyed. They're literally melted down and destroyed. So I hope that answers your question. There are other things that we do, and I don't know if one of the other panelists, Chief or Captain Walle, if you want to add to that, but that is some ways that we handle the illegal firearms that come into the city.
I think you covered it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to go to the hands that are raised.
Okay. Hi, it's Jasmine.
Hi, Deborah.
Hi. So thank you for having this. So I have a couple clarifying questions in terms, or just one actually. In terms of so I heard you're increasing patrol in certain neighborhoods and that you're using intelligence in certain data points. So what does specifically that data look like in your department? Is it every few weeks you're collecting that data and using that intelligence, and what's that kind of process looking like internally with you all?
Yeah, I'll answer that one too. Thank you, Jasmine, for that question. So The primary data points we're using are going to be the data that we can obtain from where the crime's actually occurring. So one data point, for example, is our shot spotter activations. So by being able to determine where the gunfire is coming from and how often it's coming from and what type of firearms are being used, that's all information that we gather from shot spotter. Another data point we have a crime analyst that we employ here at the department, and she collates and gathers all of the crime data and can show us exactly where those crimes are occurring. And that's actually where we concentrate our efforts and where we draw that intelligence from. It's real-time information coming from locations and people that are actually committing the crime itself, and through our crime reporting as well. And so we analyze that data, synthesize it, and make our best predictions based upon what's actually going on in the city in real time. Detectives will do that, and then they'll put bulletins together, usually on a monthly basis, and send those bulletins down to patrol, where they talk about those with the patrol officers.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Jasmine, you don't have your camera on, but I was actually showing you the printout. So I'm actually, Captain Simmons and our crime analysis unit, actually they disseminate an updated roster every time we have a shooting. So we know where the shooting occurred, the date, the victim, the potential suspect, and the status of the case. So we're able to keep better situational awareness of what's happening in the different neighborhoods. So that's very helpful for us and our patrol officers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering my question.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned too is a lot of times we receive information from our community about, things that are going on, concerns about potential shootings that are going to happen. We've actually taken a lot of guns off the street that way by saying, people calling and giving really credible information about people in a car looking to do a shooting, and we stop that car and sure enough, they have guns off the street. So a lot of that's preventative work that we're doing in conjunction with the community, and we get a lot of guns off the street that way, and we focus our efforts when we receive that type of information.
Got it. So some of that information has been credible information from.
Oh, absolutely. We get a lot of credible information that we use, and we have, I can say we have actually saved lives from that information. We have actually been able to intercede with people in a vehicle going to do a shooting, and we know that they were going to do a shooting because we got that information, and sure enough, we stopped them. They have guns in the car, and we stopped that shooting from happening.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine. And next up will be Randy. And then I'll go back to the chat, and I do see Deborah and Marisol in the Q&A, so I will come back to you.
Hi, Chief. Hi, police officers. Hi, community members. My name is Randy Joseph. I'm a community member, also a police commissioner with the Richmond Community Police Review Commission, and also part of a group called Richmond Reimagining Public Safety. My question is more so on two things. One, what are the police doing to help create processes so communities can heal from these type of violence? Because these types of violence do hurt the community in a way, and sometimes seeing more police is not the process of healing. And two, I'm also interested in seeing another way how guns get off the street. I know 2017, 2018, there was like a gun buyback program. And I was wondering if that's a program that could be brought back in order to assist with getting guns off the street. Thank you.
So I think initially you asked about, what we can do in regards to healing, and maybe I'll since Captain Simmons has been engaged with the Yahima group, maybe I'll let him talk about the conversations around that.
So yeah, Randy, thank you for that question. I agree with you. We all here at the police department agree with you that being able to heal from these types of violence is a key part of being able to move forward as a community. One of the steps we've taken is to really engage with the Yahima healing circles, and DeWanda has done just really a fantastic job of connecting with surviving victims of homicides and their families, and really being able to connect with them in a manner that helps them actually heal and move forward. And recently, she's brought us into that equation where we've had a few meetings with her, And we're going to be having more moving forward, where we're actually integrating the command staff here within investigations all the way down to the detectives that are investigating those cases to maintain that connection point with them and help them through that process. In addition to that, we're changing kind of some of the protocol as it relates to who responds out to a homicide by more actively engaging our chaplains, having them on scene when we have a homicide so that they can actually connect with victims and help connect them to resources, and follow up with them. You know, sometimes the detectives might be preoccupied actually investigating the case. Well, we have our chaplains who we've interjected into the equation who can actually engage with them in an emotional manner, a spiritual manner, to help guide them and lead them and connect them to resources that perhaps not even our detectives are, or that I would even know about. So that's one recent thing we've done to try to really improve how we're helping families and communities heal kind of in a holistic manner. And we know that that's not the end all, that there's going to be other things that we need to do, but that's a starting place to looking beyond just traditional police work and moving into kind of caring about the whole person and being able to heal from that. So I don't remember what part 2 of the question was, Randy.
It was about gun buyback programs.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, so the gun buyback programs, you're right, they have been successful in the past. Those were all grant driven. So the state or the feds will put a grant out there that allows us to access funds to do the gun buyback, or at times it might be in our city budget. And as you're well aware of, we don't have those kind of extra funds in the city budget. But we are always looking out through state and federal levels for those types of grants. And it should one come up, I mean, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't try to pursue something like that. But that's how we've been able to do those in the past, and they have absolutely been successful.
Thank you for answering my questions, and thank you for having this event. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate your question. I'm going to take a question from the chat, and then also I do see questions in the Q&A, so I just want to let you know we have time, so we'll be able to get to you in the Q&A if people can post there. But this question, I'm going to leave it anonymous. Is the police looking to partner with the Reimagining Public Safety Work Group in doing this work? And it can go to anyone on the panel.
So I'll answer that, and the answer is absolutely. We want to partner with any group that's willing to work with us, because we realize that changes need to occur, and we want to be in partnership with people that are talking about what changes can occur. I watched the presentation on Tuesday night, and I thought that there were some great ideas. And so the short answer is yes, we would love to partner and explore those ideas.
Okay, thank you. And then I am going to the next question from the chat. And this was a question about mental health that was sent anonymously. Does Richmond Police use the county crisis response team when responding to a 5150?
So this is one area that I do want to expand, but it's all going to be contingent on the capacity of the county team. So we have a mental health officer that works in conjunction with a mental health provider from the county team. But a lot of it is contacting people when they're not in crisis, when they're not calling. What we would like to do is expand our program so that we have clinicians riding with our officers in real time and responding to these mental health calls in real time, so that maybe we could take a step back, they could take a step forward to try to resolve the issue, but feel comfortable enough that we are there in case things, get violent or something like that. So we are in conversation and want to continue to have conversations about what that looks like here in Richmond. Of course, though, it's a capacity issue right now for the county.
Okay, thank you. And then the next, I'm going back to the Q&A. Mandy, if you could bring up Deborah. Deborah has a question that she wanted to pose to the panel.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Deborah Small. I'm a Richmond resident and parent. And my question is two-part. First, it goes to the use of the term gang-related in talking about law enforcement responses to community violence, in part because gangs imply a group of people whose principal reason for being together and interacting is to engage in criminal activity. And that generally promotes a certain types of law enforcement strategy versus interpersonal violence that may occur between people who have been identified as being part of a gang, but has nothing to do with ongoing criminal activity. And so it wasn't clear to me what distinction the police department was making between those things in developing strategies to address what was euphemistically called gang-related gun violence.
So what I was referring to is specifically when we refer to gang violence, it's the people that are active, the people that are actively commingling together to engage in criminal activity. Now, I also know that in Richmond, we have a lot of communities and communities where families are large, and just because they're a large family, they hang out together. They might not, just like you said, be engaged in criminal activity, but they might call themselves by a certain, moniker because they live in a certain area. But we're talking specifically when we're targeting about the people that are specifically engaged in criminal activity, mainly shootings. That's what we're focused on right now.
Does that mean that you believe the shootings are related to the criminal activity as opposed to some interpersonal dispute between those people? Because in other cities like in Boston and I think it was Highland, North Carolina, they found that a lot of what they thought was gang-related shootings were actually interpersonal, and that required a different kind of approach to reduce.
Yeah, I think that we're trying to be mindful of language here, and we are experiencing the same thing, that there are some interpersonal disputes. So that's why when I introduced the word gang, I said in a loose term, because we are experiencing the same thing that we're seeing in other communities, that there are interpersonal disputes, there might be some criminal activity. So we're using it interchangeably right now, but I want to be, I said that to be mindful of that language because I know it can be harmful to label communities. And so we're having conversations around what that means and what we should actually be referring to when we say gang or community violence and stuff like that. So we're trying to figure it out.
Thank you so much, Chief French. I'm also part of that Reimagining Public Safety Working Group with Randy and Marisol.
Good. I look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you so much for that really great question. And I think that's the reason why we have to have dialogue. If we don't come together and have these dialogues, where is that conversation going to occur? So it's definitely important, I think, for us to, have engagement like this with all the different groups that are working around these kinds of issues. So I think next we're going back. I'm still trying to clear out some of the questions in the Q&A. I'm going to actually read this one at the request of the author. What does an increase of PD patrol look like, I guess, in the event of a violent activity that goes on in a neighborhood, and what neighborhoods would be targeted or identified?
Well, author unknown. So we typically average about a dozen officers per team. There's certain times of the day, of the week, where the teams overlap, so we'll have extra officers out on the street. So based on recent shootings or intelligence that we're receiving from the investigations division, we could transfer officers from the other beats into those neighborhoods. Recently, it's been around the Hartnett, it's been around the Pullmans, it's been around the 17th, 16th Chancellor area. That's where we had our recent shootings. So we'll ship the officers as needed. And currently, right now, we're actually working really closely with the Special Investigation Division sergeants that are giving us more real-time information in order to be more strategic about the deployments.
But again, I want to be, I really want to stress that we're being very specific and targeted. We don't want to criminalize entire communities. We want to be directed to the people that we know are engaging in criminal activity. And I know that there's this issue of over policing, you know, communities of color, especially when violence is occurring. We want to be very mindful of that and make sure that we're not stopping every car in a specific neighborhood, but we're really specific in targeting people that we know are engaged in criminal activity. So I just want to really stress that point.
Thank you, Chief. Obviously, it takes a scalpel and not a hammer when you're trying to deal with these situations. Going to the next question, Mandy, if you could bring up Carla.
My question is, since we have, being that we are short-staffed and the special task force that you're putting on right now for the, to help out with your investigations, how does that affect the day-to-day?
So we actually did a department reorganization at the beginning of the year because we wanted to make patrol our primary focus. We wanted to have more than enough officers on each team to respond to calls for service. So at this point, we do have a good array of officers on patrol, so we're able to pull from the patrol teams to do some of this work, and that's where we're using the officers. But that means that we don't have extra detectives, well, not even extra, we're not fully staffed in some of our investigative units. So that's where they're really, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of using domestic and sexual assault detectives to help them with the shootings and homicides and other units like that. So right now in patrol, we have enough officers to meet mandatory requirements and to be able to do some of this directed work.
So that means we still have our gang task force working alongside of everybody else, correct? And then there's the second question would be that I saw there was something on the city council where we're almost at capacity for the overtime that you guys have, and that needs to be addressed with, you know, the community, because they don't want to, they need to be aware of the fact that you guys may not be able to respond to calls like on the spot.
So going back to your first point, we actually don't have a gang task force. We do have special investigations detectives. We used to have, I think, upwards of 12 or 13. We're down to 6. And so they're really partnering with homicide to really go after the homicide suspects. We do have leads in some cases, and so they follow those leads and try to get those people into custody. They do work on some gang cases when time allows, but with the minimum staffing that we have at this point, time doesn't allow for a lot of gang focus unless it's specifically tied to a shooting or a homicide investigation. And then regarding the overtime, it's a huge issue. There's overtime that I actually have no control over. Officers have to go to court, and that's a subpoena that they receive from the court, and they have to appear. If they're off duty, they get compensated for that. Again, we have minimum staffing, and when we don't have 9 officers available, people have to get either held over or called in to staff the beats so that there's at least 9 officers working at any given time. That's one way that we use overtime. And then we hadn't been putting officers out on the street every time we had a homicide or a shooting. But what that has resulted in is when I went back to before and all these shootings that have been occurring. So more recently, we have been using overtime to put extra officers out to try to mitigate that. I don't want to continue to see people get shot and killed on our streets, and having additional officers out there, I think can prevent some of that. So we are utilizing some overtime to curb the violence.
Thank you, Carla. I think those were all
Thank
great
you.
questions, and thank you for asking them. I know that we're kind of getting short on time, and so I want to get to as many of our questions as we can. Just a reminder, if your question didn't get answered, feel free to send it in, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. And this is part of an ongoing dialogue. It's not just a one-time thing. This is something we're going to have to keep on working on. So I'm going to go to the next question that I will read, and it's in the context of building trust with our RPD as reimagining public safety. How do we heal from institutionalized racism in the system of policing? What trainings or hiring procedures will be implemented? And how do we build trust in our community when the entire system has been in some ways been used to oppress Black people? So that was a question from the Q&A, and it can go to any of the panelists.
So I'll start with that. And I think it starts here. We have to have some very difficult conversations. First of all, I want to acknowledge that what you're saying is true. We have been the law enforcement system has oppressed communities of color from probably the beginning of time. And so we have to address that. We have to acknowledge what's happened specifically here in our community. A lot of people, talk specifically about the Cowboys, and we need to acknowledge the harm that caused us and continues to cause the relationship between the police department and the community. And we really just need to come together and have these difficult conversations and see how we want to move forward. What does the community want and expect of us, and what can we actually provide? And so those conversations need to be had and openly, and I know that they're going to be painful, but they're necessary. So I think that with their reimagining committee, and if they're willing to invite us in and start having those conversations, we also plan to start having some I don't want to call it town hall, but additional conversations with the community where we could sit down with a community member and an officer and be totally open and honest and have a conversation about what's going on. Those should be starting pretty soon. In terms of training, maybe Michelle, you can talk about our recent conversation about what I'm envisioning in terms of training for our new officers.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to the question. I think it's a very important question. I grew up here in the city of Richmond, and my family experienced institutional violence from the police. But now I work with the police department, and it was something I never imagined myself doing. And I think part of what I've seen happen over the last 10 to 12 years with RPD that would help us, and what the chief's vision is to really change the way that we bring people in. The tone that you set when you bring people in, who you promote, what kind of values you promote in your agency is going to determine in part your outcome, as well as your accountability matrix. So what the chief was really envisioning is that when we bring on board new officers, they get specific training that they're mandated by the state to be able to get to before they're cut loose and allowed to go out and police on their own. But we feel like an important piece of that that's missing is perhaps community training. So bringing people together so that they go and maybe they connect with people from RYSE or from GRIP. Maybe they spend some time working with community advocates that are working with victims of violence. Maybe they spend some time getting to know the community and having that really be part of the training matrix. And so that's something to look more closely to, something that we hope to implement in the future. We would like to work with all of you about it. So if somebody said, well, I was left out, nobody's left out. Everybody's a part of that conversation. And if you have ideas of ways that we can implement that training for new officers, it's great, because bringing on board a new officer is one of the biggest joys that I actually have in the job that I do. Because they're ready and they're like sponges, they're ready to learn, and we have to be mindful of what we're teaching them. Did that answer the question, Chief?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I am going to go to the next group of questions. I want to get some other questions that haven't been asked from some other folks. There's been a couple questions about this, so I'm going to actually go to the question about Office of Neighborhood Safety. Mandy, can you bring up Marco?
The question in the chat that I put: why hasn't the police advocated for an expansion of the Office of Neighborhood Safety if they've gotten national recognition for their success in lowering gun violence in the last 10 years in Richmond. They use 1% of the city's budget, while the police department uses more than 40%. So why isn't there like an explicit commitment to funding these kinds of efforts?
I'll take that one. I've publicly recognized the Office of Neighborhood Safety numerous times. In articles, I've recognized their contribution to our violence reduction here in Richmond, and I think that they do play a big part in the reduction that we've seen over the years. We do, talk to them in terms of, providing as much information as we can to them so that they can also go out there and contact people that we may think, that we think may be engaging in criminal activity. It's a one-way, we understand it's a delicate situation. They have to have credibility in the community. And so, I want to say, come short of saying it's a partnership, but there is a relationship. And so there's constant communication. I don't know if it's our position, if it's our job necessarily as a police department to advocate for another city to receive funding. We are, I know that we take a lot of the city budget, but we are also a 24-hour operation, which most other than the fire department, we're the only other department that has staff here 24 hours a day. So of course our budget's going to be higher. A majority of that comes from staff. And I do think that there should be additional funding for other programs like ONS to combat violence. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Chief. Marco, did that answer your question? I saw you had another question on there, but did that answer that specific question for you?
Yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
Do you want me to ask the second question?
We're running low on time, so it's up to you. Do you want to do that or allow someone else an opportunity to go?
I'll allow someone else to have the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to get to Maritza. Can we bring Maritza up?
Okay, so I know that this particular meeting is to address kind of gang and gun violence in our community, but I was wondering, the number of sideshows that we've had recently and how that is being addressed, and if that's bringing any further gun violence to our community.
That absolutely is bringing further gun violence. Several of the sideshows that we've had in the city have resulted in shots fired. People are shooting off firearms. I think one person was actually hit in an early sideshow early this summer down, I think, on Nevin Avenue. So that is contributing to it. We're seeing sideshows occur every single weekend now. 300 to 400 cars showing up in various areas of our community, engaging in sideshow activity. And it's really a drain on our resources. Like we said, we only have, maybe 9 to 12 officers at any given time on the streets. And when they're dealing with 300 to 400 cars, that takes the entire team to deal with that. And so we're also looking at putting in additional overtime officers to help deal with this issue. Next year, we're looking at, again, redeploying so that we have extra officers during the times that we know that these sideshows are occurring. Yesterday, I had a conversation with the other chiefs in the county as well as CHP to see how that we can work together to address this issue. Right now, we don't have a lot of interventions. We'll be going to council pretty soon to ask for stop sticks, which will help get people out of the city. In terms, stop sticks are a tool that we utilize that can pop somebody's tires if they're engaging in sideshow activity. But we would use it more as a mechanism to corral these vehicles out of our city and onto the freeway. So it's kind of putting stop sticks out so that we're directing them in a particular area so they can get onto the freeway and hopefully out of our city. And so there's a lot of different mechanisms that we're trying to come up with to address this issue.
Thank you. And thank you, Maritza, for that question.
Captain Walle might want to add to that since that's
Yeah.
the whole issue.
Yeah, so in the event of a sideshow that shows up in our city, our officers would set up a perimeter around the sideshow. They would establish an exit point from the sideshow. They would block off the other exits with the stop sticks. They would notify the people that it's an unlawful assembly and tell them to leave. If in the event they didn't leave, that's when we basically do a metered exit. So now, okay, now you have to go one out at a time. We'd start checking for driver licenses, registrations, sobriety, and meter these people out safely so everyone's not rushing out at one time. Hopefully that'll be a level of deterrence. And I know that's been effective at other agencies. So we're trying to model that here as well too.
Thank you for that, Captain Walle. I know that came up at our talk with traffic yesterday. Some questions about sideshows, open spaces for people to be able to do that kind of stuff. What are the penalties for sideshows? So if anyone is interested, feel free to look at that broadcast. We'll be able to put that on pretty soon so you can check out that conversation if you didn't see it. So we're getting to the end of our time, and I know there were more questions than we had time for, but I think we got to the vast majority of them. If you didn't get your question answered or you want to continue that dialogue offline, or if there's something that you don't feel comfortable asking on the Zoom, that's totally fine. Feel free to inbox it to the email that's dropped into the chat. And that way we can answer that one-on-one and you don't have to answer that on Zoom. We want to acknowledge that, but we want to continue this conversation. So I'm going to give the chief and the panel a few last words. Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I just want to thank you and Mandy for navigating all this and being the host. But I just want to thank you all for coming to this conversation today, asking the questions and being willing to work on solutions with us. This is not an easy problem to address. I know that it's a major concern in the community anytime that we see violence, and because we all don't want to see any further people getting shot or killed in our community. So we're all in this together, and I hope that we'll continue to have these conversations and partner. You know, we talked about ONS, we talked about RYSE, you know, Bay Area peacekeepers. Everybody needs to come to the table to address this issue of violence. It's not just a police department issue, it's a community issue. And I hope that people will continue to come to the table and work towards solutions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
this is Captain Walle. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. My last words are, if most of our guns that we're recovering from the street are stolen, so if you're a gun owner, if you know a gun owner, please ask them to buy a safe, secure their firearms in their homes, in their vehicles. If it's in a vehicle, keep it in the trunk or keep it in a locked box attached to their vehicle. That would help us out greatly because most of the guns that we are recovering are stolen. Thanks.
Evening, everybody. So I just want to let folks know too that this is not just a problem that the city of Richmond is struggling with, but if regionally in this general Bay Area on the Highway 80 corridor from Vallejo to Oakland, including us in the middle, we're all experiencing right now kind of a spike in gun violence. And so I wanted to also assure the residents of Richmond that we are reaching out to neighboring agencies to share information and to share resources, because like we need the entire community here to come together to address Richmond's issues, really the greater Bay Area, we all need to come together to share resources to address this issue regionally, because it's not just a Richmond issue. And so just keep that in mind as well too. And I hope everyone stays safe, and thank you for taking your time this evening to have this conversation with us.
Thank you guys, and thanks to all the panelists, but thank you to all of you who took time out from wherever you are to listen. Just so you know, this will be rebroadcast so that that way you can share the link with other people who didn't get a chance. Maybe there's other people who have questions, but it's part of an ongoing dialogue. I mean, growing up in the city of Richmond, I can say truly that I am tired of going to funerals. I want to go to birthday parties. I want to go to graduations. I want to go to positive things in the city, and I think that we can get there, but we're all going to have to do our part, and we're all going to have to work together to be able to make it happen. There was a question in the chat that I didn't get to follow up on. It was Rodney's question about, having citizens sit in on oral boards when officers, are becoming officers. I think there's a role for that. So we have lots of different ways for people to get involved, but we need you. We need the partnership. If there's one part of this that doesn't work, it doesn't work at all. So we have to have it work on the PD part and the community part coming together. So I appreciate all of you being on here. Appreciation to Mandy for being in the chat and helping us bring people on and off. This is not an easy thing to do in the Zoom format, and you made it look easy. And thank you to everyone who participated. We will make sure, if you would like a copy of this, we're gonna put it on our Facebook and send it out to our list, but make sure you email rpdcommunity@richmondpd.net so that we can send you the link and you can share it with somebody. And thank you so much. I hope you all have a good night and a safe night. And I'd like to just take just a moment, if you can indulge me, to have a moment of silence for all those who have lost their lives to violence in Richmond this year. Thank you, and have a good evening.